It's time for Joan Esposito. Live, local, and progressive.
I want somebody who's passionate. I want somebody who can talk to people like a real person, who can make people feel things, who can make people want to follow them.
It's time for Joan Esposito on WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk.
Honora's having a good night. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, that's great news. 2 wins already. I guess Americans are excited to see somebody finally stand up to a powerful Russian.
Best line of the night. Hi, I'm Joan Esposito. Thanks for joining me this Monday, March 3rd. That's from Conan O'Brien, who hosted the Oscars last night. Not a hugely political. All the hot button issues did get mentioned, but I thought that was my personal favorite of the night. Yes, standing up to Russians. Did you see that J.D. Vance tried to take his family to Vermont skiing? And I don't know if they ended up skiing or not, but I know they had to switch from where they were planning to stay because there were protesters lining the route as they drove in. There were protesters at the resort. They just didn't feel safe. Yeah. J.D. Vance actually getting out and getting a taste of what Americans think of him as opposed to the Donald Trump, Elon Musk, Peter Thiel. Oh, you're the best. Oh, J.D., you make my heart beat faster. Yeah, only now he got out and got a taste of what real people think. How do you think, his wife is a woman of color. And J.D. Vance seems to be flirting with super far-right parties. Some call them neo-Nazi parties. How do you think she feels about that? Do you think she's one of those people that, he's got this incredible fame, he's got the vice presidency, she can see the presidency just a heartbeat away, and maybe her values are taking a back seat to this new life they've got? I mean, it's got to be pretty heady, don't you think? I don't know. I don't know how people... over the weekend, I sold my Tesla. Not because there was anything wrong with the car. Just as far as cars go, it was a pretty good car. But I felt that even though I bought the car 5 years ago, before all of this, back then when we thought Elon was just quirky and we didn't know how awful a human being he was, I just felt like I was, maybe this seems hyperbolic to you, but I sort of felt like I was letting my country down by driving it. I said to somebody, how can I do what I do for a living and say the things I say and drive a Tesla and support the man who is almost single-handedly trying to bring our country to its knees? Not that he is operating in a vacuum. Don't ever forget that he is doing exactly what Donald Trump wants him to do. So this whole idea of we didn't elect Elon Musk, he's got to go, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, that's all well and good. But he would not be in a position to tear apart our government agencies if he did not have Donald Trump's express blessing. And remember, when he showed up at Donald Trump's first cabinet meeting, Donald Trump looked around the room and told the members, his hand-picked cabinet, that if they didn't like Elon Musk, they could just resign right now. The message was very clear. If I have to choose between Elon and any of you, you're gone. So, yeah, we can all wring our hands and say Elon Musk is a bad man, and that is not inaccurate. But everything Elon's doing is something that Trump wants done. Because as much as Trump loves Elon's money, and he does, and as much as Trump doesn't want to do the day-to-day slog of the presidency, making all those pesky decisions, because he doesn't, he still, like a mob boss, needs to be the guy in charge. And the mob boss can have a lieutenant that's out there breaking bones and taking names. But he ultimately answers to somebody. And Elon Musk is doing what he's doing because Donald Trump is okay with it. Don't ever lose sight of the big picture there. We are opening up the phone lines and the text lines as we do. One little programming note of a couple things of interest. I'm not going to be here this Friday, and for a few days next week. I think I'm back. Thursday's my last day, and then I'm back again the following Thursday. I'm going to go see my daughter out in California. Need a little vacay, a few days to be with someone I love and think about other things, which is just what the doctor ordered. So that's one programming note. And today I've asked Spencer Critchley to come back in the 4 o'clock hour, but we're not doing the WCPT book club. That will be in a couple of weeks. I want to talk to him about a guy by the name of Curtis Yarvin. He is sort of a self-described philosopher. He's always been somebody who has mostly been laughed at and discounted because he was incredibly fringe. He doesn't believe that we should have democracy. But he is somebody that Elon Musk pays attention to and Peter Thiel pays attention to. Therefore, I have to believe that J.D. Vance is paying attention to him. And it might be worth our while to talk about this guy and talk about what this guy has been espousing. And that might give us a little bit of insight into at least some of the billionaires who are currently running our government. That's going to be in the 4 o'clock hour. Until then, we're going to spend the first hour taking your calls, talking about the news of the day, reading your texts, which, thank you, have already started to come in. But remember that number, 773-763-9278. I'm saying it slowly because lately we've been getting a lot of first-time callers, and I really, really appreciate that. People who say they've listened for a while, but they've never called in. Well, this is participatory radio. So consider calling in. And if I said even with that slow recitation, if that was too fast, think of it this way. 773-763-WCPT. Okay, you got that? Oh, there's a few things I want to share with you before we go to the phone lines. You know, Mike Johnson told the Republican members of Congress to stop having town halls because he was tired of seeing the clips of Republican congresspeople getting booed and screamed at. Apparently, Keith Self, the Republican congressperson who represents an area just east of Dallas, either didn't get the message or thought maybe it would be different for him. He was mistaken. Republican Keith Self went to an auditorium in Wiley, Texas, to talk to his constituents. Let me share a little bit of the sound from that with you. Listen to this.
Now back to Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
Take two. Keith Self went to Wiley, Texas. He was a Republican congressman, and he decided that even though his boss, Mike Johnson, said, "Ooh, guys, don't hold any more town halls. I'm tired of these sound clips that make the rounds of everybody screaming at you and yelling at you." Yes, because we don't really want to acknowledge that what we know we're doing is so wildly unpopular. Well, Mr. Self apparently decided that either he had this one scheduled already, or maybe because he comes from deep red Texas and his district, like the state of Texas, is pretty red. He thought maybe things would be different for him. The Republican congressman who sees this district that's just east of Dallas showed up in Wiley, Texas at a big auditorium, and things did not go well for Congressman Self. Listen to this.
The other one is the Doge program. This is very closely akin to This is very closely akin to what Bill Clinton did between 94 Bill Clinton only managed to cut 400,000 jobs between 94 and 2000. This ain't the bill.
Remember, that was not in an area that's a swing state. That's not a swing district. That is a deeply red district that voted in large numbers for Donald Trump. I think Congressman Keith Self thought that he was going to be walking into a very friendly crowd of supporters. He was mistaken. He was mistaken. Couldn't happen to a nicer guy. Speaking of us as Resistance Central, if you live in Naperville, 4:30 to 5:15 today, there's going to be a Musk or Us rally at the corner of Jackson and Webster. Musk or Us rally. By the way, over the weekend, and I'm not the only one who sold my Tesla. Did you see that Elvira sold her Tesla? And like Sheryl Crow, who did the same thing, they are selling their cars and they are donating the proceeds to NPR. There are lots of protests going on at Tesla dealerships. There's even a website if you want to find out if there's a Tesla protest near you. It's called TeslaTakedown.com. Tesla stock has dropped a lot. And from what I've read, even though he has SpaceX and he has Tesla, and he does those Starlink satellites, he gets a lot of his wealth from Tesla. The stock is very much down. And, you know, I think the cars are going to start losing value. I decided in December that I was going to get rid of the Tesla. And, of course, December, you know, you're really busy with all kinds of stuff going on. But I looked up the Kelley Blue Book value for my car, started trying to do some research. I knew I wanted an electric car, but what was out there, blah, blah, blah. And I'm not the fastest gun in the West. So I just got around to finally narrowing it down to the cars I wanted to look at and starting to get out there and looking at them and learning more. So in December, you know, Kelley Blue Book gives you a range. That was in December. Sold my car, traded in my car, March 1st. December, January, February, March. That's like, well, let's call it 2 months, 2.5 months. My car was in very, very, very good condition. It was very, very, very low mileage. I should have gotten the top of what Kelley Blue Book said. Not only did I not get the top, not only did I not get the bottom of what they projected my car was worth, I got $6,000. The best trade-in offer I got was $6,000 below the lowest value that Kelley Blue Book quoted for my car in December. So, yeah. Finally got it done, but I certainly paid a price for taking so long. So there are protests at Tesla dealerships. People are being urged to sell their Teslas. I know 4 people who 3 months ago owned a Tesla. 3 of us have gotten rid of the car. And I suspect number 4 is also going to be getting rid of their Tesla. And that's some of, like most cars made by a company, some of them are good, some of them are bad. I happen to have a really good car. It was a good car. But I felt awful after what started happening. I felt like I was supporting the enemy when I drove it, that somehow driving it was some sort of validation. And I just couldn't do it anymore. And it's not the car's fault, It's the car company's owner's fault. And, you would think, I know that when you have a board of directors, when you're a publicly traded company, you have a board of directors. And for companies that have been around for a long time, lots of times the board of directors are filled with people who bring expertise and people who say, look, my expertise is knowing facts and figures, and I don't think that you're doing your auditing the right way. It doesn't seem like it's up to industry standard. If you have a really good board of directors, they actually keep an eye on what the CEO and the company are doing. And if something is making the company be less profitable than they think it should be, that's a problem that they bring to the CEO's attention and expect the CEO to address. But younger companies, particularly companies that haven't been public for a long time, there's a way to structure the board of directors so that the CEO basically stacks the deck, only puts people on the board who are friendly, people who will rubber stamp whatever the CEO wants. They don't really act in the best interest of the shareholders the way they're supposed to. It happens, and it's been shared with me that a lot of people perceive that Tesla is structured that way. Because my question to people has been, the stock is losing value. Europeans have stopped essentially buying Teslas. There are protests at Tesla dealerships, and it is all because of the personal behavior of the CEO. And that's the kind of thing where the board would call the CEO in and say, dude, no more. Change your ways. You are hurting the bottom line. And that's what we are here to keep an eye on. I keep waiting for the Tesla board of directors to publicly announce that, I think they should ask Elon Musk to leave the company and find a new CEO. I really, truly do. But he gets a big part of his wealth from that company. And, he's basically got a board of directors that seems to function as a rubber stamp. So, good luck. If you've got Tesla stock, good luck with that. It's too bad. It's really too bad. But you know what? There's lots of other companies. When I spoke to the Friends of Labor in Joliet, they taught me something that I didn't know before, that you can look at a car's VIN number and get an idea of where it's made. I talked to a couple of guys from the UAW, and they said when you go to buy a car, look for a 1 or a 4 or a 5 as the first number. That tells you the car was put together in the United States. They said if the VIN starts with a 2, it's probably coming from Canada. But if your VIN starts with a 3, they say if it's a 3, let it be. Don't buy that car. You know, you can find the vehicle identification number, which is what a VIN is, if you look in the front windshield down in the corner. There's a little metal plate that says VIN. Nancy Janens, I'm sorry, Nancy, if I'm saying your last name wrong, sent me an email explaining every one of the numbers in your VIN means something. And she found online a descriptor of what all the numbers mean. And she sent it to me. It's really interesting. Like the first character, as I've said, tells you where in the world the vehicle was built. And as they told me, 1, 4, 5. Now, what I didn't have a chance to ask them about, because I hadn't yet started all my research, I've looked at cars that have VINs that start with 7 or 8, so I don't know what the heck that's all about. I'm trying to educate myself as a consumer, and I wonder if I can post this link. Maybe I'll post this link on Blue Sky that Nancy sent me of how you can figure out all kinds of stuff about your car by what the various characters are in your VIN number. I thought it was fascinating. So maybe I'll try to put that out on my Blue Sky account. We are again getting ready to take your calls. Paul's got a bunch of people lined up on the phone lines. I'm going to spend this upcoming break reading over your texts and sharing that with you. And and maybe I'll go to my Blue Sky account and figure out how to get this link up there that teaches you what all the different things in your VIN mean. I mean, it's really, really fascinating. By the way, if you're on Blue Sky, you can find me at joanesposito.bsky.social. That is where I am. We're going to come back right after a break.
Now back to Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
We are taking your calls and talking about the news of the day. People are sending me car texts, and you're absolutely right. There is, as of this moment, because of course it could disappear any second, for certain cars, there is electric cars, there's a federal tax rebate of $7,500. Some dealerships are also on their own offering. We went to look at an Ioniq, the Ioniq 5. A lot of the Ioniqs, the earlier Ioniqs come from South Korea, but the new 2025 Ioniq 5 is made in Georgia. So that fits in with the Made in America thing I was looking for. And a lot of Hyundai dealerships are offering $7,500 rebates of their own. I chose to buy a used car, so a lot of that wasn't available to me. But I appreciate all of the information that is coming through. And also, sometimes there are rebates that are only available if you lease a car. For some reason, you'd think they would want you to buy the car, but one place that I visited, they offered rebates for leases, but not for purchases. I don't know, the whole car thing is really weird. It really takes so much time and energy and effort to figure out where you're going to buy from and what exactly you want. The whole rebate thing is a little bit confusing right now. But thank you for those of you who've sent in advice for me. I should have had this conversation in December when I was just beginning my hunt. Let's go to the phone lines. Ed is calling from Palos Park. Hey, Ed, how are you today?
Hey, Joan, happy Monday.
Happy Monday.
Yes. I really have to commend you for having the courage and integrity to separate yourself from the Tesla. I think somebody like you in the public eye, you will be a leader in that regard as people turn their Teslas.
Well, you know, it's interesting, Ed, that you say that, because I kind of just felt like I was doing it for my own personal peace of mind. But my girlfriend said, you ought to post on your social media that you're getting rid of the Tesla. And I thought, oh, what the heck? So I took a picture of me in the car, and I explained that I was getting rid of it. And man, the reaction was very, very positive,
Yeah,
so I'm
impressive.
I'm glad.
Very impressive, Joan. Very impressive. Also, I'd like to comment. Over the weekend, I seen Lindsey Graham, Marco Rubio. They were on some news shows, and I couldn't believe the hypocrisy of both of them.
Oh, I
they
know.
should bury their head in shame. My God, how horrible. And when Marco was on George Stephanopoulos Sunday, and he spoke, he rattled on all rants in, favoring Trump, and Trump is just out of this world. And he would not even give George a chance to talk. I mean, I mean, I'd have pulled the switch. And he just kept going on and on and on, making these, So that was bad. And also what has surfaced recently are these Epstein tapes. I've heard discussions on that they're going to release
the Epstein
the tapes.
files, yes.
Epstein files, yeah. And, now people don't know, but it's becoming news. Epstein lived 9 miles away from Trump for most of the time he knew him, 25 years. And yet Trump says, I didn't know, I just know him casually. We're not close friends. And but they've
Yeah.
So in regards to the guy hanging himself in a cell, now you think about that and you wonder, with that kind of money that Epstein had behind him and whatever, I'd say this could be very deep collusion. They could do anything, because how do you, if you have live guards watching a cell, how does a person hang himself and they find him in the morning?
Yeah, there was a lot of stuff that was suspicious about that. He was supposed to be on a suicide watch, and there were 2 guards that were supposed to check on him like every 15 minutes, and somehow they just didn't.
Mm-hmm. Because I'm sure he had a ton of information about Trump, and Trump couldn't take the chance to keep him alive. So that's where we were with that,
Yeah.
And to the last point I'd like to make, I'm sure Europe's everybody is so upset over that terrible display Friday. 2 bullies ganging up on a person that has went through hell trying to save his country, and they wouldn't relent, And Trump kept degrading them and, making comments. And then, he's flapping his arms like a whirlybird. I thought he was going to become airborne there for a while. And, I mean, it was so ridiculous,
Yeah. A lot of ridiculous going around these days.
Yeah. So I'm glad to hear now there is opposition all over the country. And
yes, indeed.
Slow, but it's going to get going. So
I hope so, Ed. I hope it just gets hotter and hotter and hotter for these guys. Ed, thank you so much for the call. I really appreciate hearing from you.
Thank you.
Let's go to Angelique, who's on the line from Chicago. Thanks for the call, Angelique. How are you?
Hi, How are you, Joan? It's been a while since I've spoken with you.
Yes.
Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Okay, so in light of everything that's going on and to the last point that your caller made about the shameful, absolute, literal shameful, I was almost in tears watching what went on between President Zelensky and the clown and the Veep last week. I think now more than ever, our democracy warriors, those people who know how to speak truth to power and who can go toe-to-toe on the Fox News, on the OAN, on the Bro podcast, Joe Rogan's, things like that. There is a softening of the ground now with Republicans and MAGAs who are upset with what Musk and Trump are doing to their Medicaid, their Social Security, their IRS and veterans benefits and all those things. And I think we've got to get the Elizabeth Bernies, Jasmine's, Chris Murphy, like everybody needs to be out, not just preaching to the choir, Joan, not going on MSNBC. That's great, but that's the choir. I need you on Fox. I know Gavin Newsom is tied up with, fires and things, devastation, but people like him who can speak well about democratic policies and the things that we can and have done on behalf of citizens. I know people say, oh, we lost the middle class and we lost, but what's going on now is absolutely anti everything that these people voted for. And we need our warriors out there talking not to each other. I love Nicole Wallace. We don't need to get on her show. We need to be on Fox News. We need to be on OAN. We need these people out there because there are Republicans who are feeling the brunt of these policies. Does that make any sense to you?
It does make sense to me. It makes absolute sense to me. I've also heard people saying that, the congressional Democrats should be like, when Maxwell Frost, that young guy who's the youngest guy in Congress, he led a group of people over to I believe it was the Treasury building, to the first day that they were trying to fire people, and they wouldn't let them in, and they were out there protesting. There should be Democrats leading a group of people to every one of these agencies that's being eviscerated by Elon Musk. Have it something like that. A lot of these shows, you have to be invited. There's only so many people that get to sit down with George Stephanopoulos. But you lead a protest, then the cameras come to you. You don't have to go to the cameras.
Yes, that's exactly right. And I hate to say this, but the mainstream media, like George and the rest of them, because of the lawsuit, that's really, he didn't push back because, he's really walking a tight line, right? They paid $15 million or something or whatever it was to Trump because of the, mistake that he made or whatever it was, and they're suing CBS and all these other crazy things. But we've got to find a way to get the message out, and I really think now is the time as the right is also feeling the brunt of these policies of Project 2025 that they did not understand. They didn't understand terrorists. There's a lot of, low information voters. But I think if we can find a way to get invited or be on their shows with people who really can talk in plain English about what they did when they made that vote last week to cut $880 billion from Medicaid, like what that means about your grandparents in nursing homes, like what that means,
Yeah, like the Republicans want to sell this idea that everybody who's on some kind of assistance is a fraud, that they're, that they're just an able-bodied person, watching TV and eating chocolates all day. And I'm not saying that from time to time somebody doesn't take advantage of the system, but the vast majority of the people on Medicaid, their Grandma's in the nursing home, and she's, there because Medicaid is helping pay for it. Little kids who are growing up in impoverished households are getting health care through Medicaid. Disabled people who can't get or hold a full-time job, and can't make money, they're getting health care through Medicaid. And this idea that Republicans had that somehow it's all a bunch of lazy people, that somehow it's all a bunch of people who should be required to work for those benefits, it's all hyperbole. It's all talking points, because they should know better. Anybody who actually looks into who is getting Medicaid should know better. They should know better.
And all the things that he undid, the insulin prices at $35 and the asthma inhalers and all of that. I mean, this is the time that I think we can find a way to dialogue with people who have a differing opinion and, find those commonalities that really, really can draw them in. We need a midterm turnout. We need the 89 million that sat out who are Democrats, and we need to get some of those Republicans who are feeling the brunt. We've got to find a way, because this can't go on. I mean, we've got, unfortunately, 4 years of this, but we've got to find a way to get back what we lost and find a way to move him out. But, I don't know, Joan. I was going to sit back. I was in the 92%, and I was going to sit back and let the FAFO happen. But once Musk got in Social Security and IRS and those other agencies, I was like, I can't, because now that directly impacts me.
Yep. I hear you, Angelique. I hear you. Thank you so much for the call.
Of course.
I really appreciate it. Going to try to get one more call in before we go to break. Let's go to our good friend Jim, who is calling from Chicago. Hello, Jim.
Hi, Joan. I was so disappointed that Trump didn't get a belated Oscar for The Apprentice. I didn't see any. I didn't see any clips, but I'd love to have seen him get an Oscar for that, because I'm sure that he'll get one eventually. But he's been in that character. He's adapted that character, and somehow.
Best supporting actor supporting the country of Russia.
The best supporting actor could be the script itself. I mean, I couldn't watch the show. Honest to God, Joan, if I was on Demerol in the hospital, I'd unplug it. I'd have the nurse unplug the TV if I was the only thing on. I couldn't watch that. My life depended on it. But when you think about how it caught on with the public subliminally in their minds, these Trump supporters actually believe that he's a businessman. They always say that he's a businessman, real quickly, which to me it means absolutely squat. I don't even know what that means. But in the show, he gives these people thumbs up, thumbs down, and he gives them these jobs that. And not only that, but the job is bestowed on them. It's not even like if they want the job or not, or how is the job after 2 weeks, or what kind of a miserable employer was Trump. We know that he's got to be miserable. But that's stuck in the public's mind. And it's amazing how television can have that effect on the public. But in this case, anyway, Joan, what I was going to say is, when you travel, be careful of this flu. I mean, definitely, nobody's getting vaccinated anymore. You got Kennedy, you got crazy Kennedy, who's an anti-vaxxer. No, it's not funny.
He did announce over the weekend that he was sending 20,000 doses of measles vaccine to Texas, where this measles vaccine outbreak started. So I don't know. Maybe he just had a brain cramp there and he forgot he's anti-vaccine for a minute, or he realizes, or somebody's told him, that measles is one of the most contagious illnesses on the planet. And if you're exposed to it, you may not develop symptoms for 3 weeks. 3 weeks.
Oh, I know that. But it also, when I'm a vaccinated person, you can get that at any age, believe it or not. I mean, it's so serious, it's incredible. But I'm afraid when I go through my normal routine, I'm looking at these people like, were they vaccinated? I'm talking about for the flu. were they vaccinated for the flu? Because this flu is going to go on. Apparently,
you might be. I don't think the way it looks right now, there isn't going to be any flu vaccine in the fall. So people like me are going to have to stay really close to home and not go anywhere.
I know that, Joe. But only that. But you got to work. You got to bring hand sanitizer.
Yep.
And you've got to be, a couple of feet away. You don't want to be in the scrum.
The only thing I've got going for me, Jim, is that I'm so old that I actually had measles. I had chicken pox. I had mumps. All these things that young kids get vaccinated for, I got to enjoy the actual illness. So, apparently that's good.
Yeah. But when they're cutting, think about overseas, too, when they're cutting the funding to the poor people overseas and the disease. The doctors will tell you the reason we vaccinate the people in different countries because they get on a plane too.
There you go. How about that? Look at that, Jim. You can figure out something that they don't seem to be able to figure out. We are an interconnected world. But, back when I was a medical reporter for Channel 5 some 20 years ago, I remember going out to O'Hare where they have a little medical station and talking to them and how the fear was, and this was way before COVID, that somebody gets a really serious infectious illness, gets on a plane, and within 24 hours, that illness could be spread literally across the world.
Absolutely. AIDS was, they had it to a stewardess or something, but the point is, it could happen, and people think, it won't happen to me because I'm in Cincinnati, and that person's just, somewhere 10,000 miles away, but that's not the truth. The truth is that you can walk right into that disease. But this is civilization, Joe. We're supposed to go forward in civilization, not backward. But anyway, Joan, thanks for the program.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for the call,
Bye-bye.
Jim. I appreciate that. A number of people have texted in to let me know that Polestar, which is a company that makes electric cars, they're apparently riding this anti-Elon wave, and Polestar dealerships are offering Tesla owners a special rebate if they bring their Tesla to Polestar and get rid of it and buy a new Polestar vehicle. There's some sort of extra special enticement to get rid of your Tesla if you want to do that. So thank you for that information. We're going to take a real quick break and be back with more after this.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
Before we go back to the phone lines, I want to share something. Amy Klobuchar was on, what was Lawrence O'Donnell's show Friday night, but it was being hosted by Jonathan Capehart. And she talked about Ukraine. She talked about what a bad guy Putin is. And she has been one of the people that has been vocal. She's also been trying to some people's dismay, sort of keep the lines of communication with Republicans open. She has been appearing at events on Capitol Hill, bipartisan things, and some people think that that's a mistake and that she shouldn't be there. But she is pretty clear-eyed about what's going on, and I wanted to share this with you. Again, this is Senator Amy Klobuchar on MSNBC with Jonathan Capehart Friday night. Listen to this.
I believe we're going to have to move forward and find a way forward. There are, it's just too much bloodshed. And Vladimir Putin, who has, his regime has shot down passenger planes. He is someone who has imprisoned and killed political opponents. He is someone who has killed journalists. He will not stop. And Zelensky's point tonight in that meeting was simple. He said, we need a strong ironclad security agreement, which is going to mean troops and help, because whether it was the Minsk agreement or other ones, Putin has violated them. And that was the simple point he was making when J.D. Vance claimed he was being disrespectful. It is a point that numerous Republicans have made throughout the week as these European leaders have visited.
J.D. Vance. Donald Trump apparently needs a handler these days. So if Elon is unavailable, I guess J.D. Vance will do in a pinch. Let's go back to the phone lines. Ron from Chicago is on the line. Hello, Ron.
Hello. Yes. What happened last Friday? That was like a form of extortion by Trump. You know, if you don't pay me for protection, then bad things are going to happen to you.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yes.
And, you know, he's such a bad businessman. Ukraine and the United States had negotiated a deal where we were going to get their rare minerals, a pretty high percentage of their rare minerals. And Zelensky was supposedly going to be signing the deal. And Trump just blew that all up. Zelensky left. The deal is unsigned. There is no deal. So Trump is such a bad businessman. Even if he wanted to criticize Zelensky, you'd think a good businessman would be smart enough to get the contracts signed first.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. No. And what would happen if North Korea invaded South Korea? Would Trump call the president of South Korea and say, how much are you going to pay me to send troops over there? You know.
Yeah.
That's
or, you know, he used to exchange love letters with Kim Jong-un. He could just call up his bromance buddy and say, dude, you know, it would make me look really good if after this phone call you withdrew your troops. Do you think you could do that for me, my bromance?
Oh, yeah. Love and kisses.
Yeah. Yeah, we're both going to grow old waiting for that, Ron.
Right. And there was a story on Friday that nobody paid attention to, that Trump signed one of his executive orders that he wants to have all the national forests and national parks to be deforested. Why does he want to cut down all the trees so he can start drilling for oil?
Probably.
Yeah.
Probably, or mining. Why not?
Yeah.
Or better yet, let's clear off all those trees and build a hotel. Let's put a resort up there, Ron.
Yeah, the bears can find another home somewhere.
That's right. Nobody likes those bears anyway.
No, especially Chicago Bears.
Yeah, nobody likes them either. Thank you, Ron.
Right.
Thank you for the call. Somebody texted in that they were talking to their doctor about various vaccines. What I saw over the weekend as I was reading, if you were born before 1957, you, like me, have pretty much had all of the childhood illnesses, so we don't have to worry about whether or not our immunity from a vaccine is still strong, because we got the real thing. But if you were born after 1957, you might want to talk to your doctor. There should be a way to find, even if you've switched doctors, there should be a way to find out the vaccinations that you have had, because some of them, you know, they do wear out after a while, and some of them only last. Like I get a tetanus shot. I think those last for 10 years, and because I tend to be a little klutzy, I make sure that I get a tetanus shot every 10 years. So that if I do scrape my skin on something that's a little bit rusty or dirty, I don't have to run to the doctor right away. So, yeah, get in touch with your doc. Somebody else, since on the subject of electric cars, somebody said that Rivian cars have been well reviewed. There's actually, you can go see a couple of Rivians out at Old Orchard. They've taken over a storefront there. Those seemed nice, a little bit big. I didn't really kind of want that much size. And somebody said Lucid is widely considered to be one of the best luxury electric vehicles ever made. I didn't even go to a Lucid dealership because I agree. And they're all beautiful. They're all really nice sedans. They're all really long range. The longest range you can get right now, according to Car and Driver, is, I think, with a Lucent. But they're wildly expensive. I don't know if there's a market for it because it's a new car company. I don't know how many used ones you can find. But the new ones that I looked at were like $110,000. Seriously. That wasn't what I was looking to spend, And if I agree with you. It's supposed to be a terrific car. So there you go. Let's see, I've got time for this. Somebody texted in who was on the phone lines, apparently had to hang up. They wanted to make a couple of comments. That they said I could have used my Tesla like Ralph Nader did with Corvairs, put stickers all over them. Well, Ray wanted to get, there's a sticker you can get, a bumper sticker that says, I bought this car before I knew Elon was an a-hole. Only it doesn't say a-hole. But I didn't really want to drive around with that. And the other comment they wanted to make, Doge employees can get into our information. Can someone get theirs and publish it online? That's a great idea. A lot of the people who were assigned to work for Doge have quit. We do still have Elon's flying monkeys, though. The 19, 20-somethings that apparently now have access to pretty much all of our personal and health and financial information. And doesn't that make you feel safe? We're going to take a break for news, and then we're going to be back with much more after this.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
Before we move on, I want to either clarify something or actually make it more confusing, probably a little bit of both. I said that the Musk or Us rally in Naperville was today, 4:30 to 5:15, and somebody who texted in said they looked it up and it's supposed to be tomorrow. And I double-checked the email that I got from Indivisible Chicago Action, and they give today's date, but they also say Tuesday. So it says Tuesday, March 3rd. Well, Tuesday is March 4th. Obviously, Monday is March 3rd. So since they gave us a conflicting day and time, and the person who texted in said that they found something that listed it as tomorrow, let's just assume that they got the date wrong on what they sent me, and that it will be Tuesday, March 4th, not Monday, March 3rd. So if you live in the vicinity of Naperville, it's going to be at Jackson and Webster, 4:30 to 5:15. And Indivisible Naperville, which is probably who I should have reached out to rather than a reposting from another group, is the one to contact if I have just confused the living bejesus out of you. So I apologize for that. I mean no harm. So let's get started with the rest of our day. I am joined now by our good friend Laura Rodriguez, Vice President of Government Affairs at the Center for American Progress Action Fund. How are you, Laura, on this lovely Monday?
Hi, Joan. I'm handling things. We are.
I read that in Norway, when somebody asks you how you're doing, a typical response is to say, I'm up and not crying. Up and not crying. And that is my new response. Instead of people saying, how are you doing? Fine. Up and not crying. So
yeah,
that's probably, what is it, 610 days till the midterm elections? That seems like a very long time, Laura. Very long time.
It sure does, because this has been the longest month and change in the history of time.
Yeah.
As we see, Donald Trump and his administration and his unelected buddy, Elon Musk, tearing the government down in ways that, yes, we imagined, but no, we did not think it would happen this quickly.
No.
And I will tell you, D.C. is reeling at the moment.
Yeah, I can only imagine. Well, the tech bros have always, when they want to disrupt an industry, they've always, move fast and break things. And when it comes to government, that same move fast and break things, it isn't accomplishing the same kind of, I think, exciting innovation. The disruption isn't leading to brand new ideas and better ways of doing things. It's leading to a whole lot of pain and hurt. And I don't know how you feel about this, Laura. I know that the legal system is trying to put the brakes on a lot of it, saying a lot of the firings are illegal, a lot of the programs that are trying to be shut down, that they don't have the power, the legal standing to do that. But I'm really worried that unless they are reined in somehow, this administration is not only going to lead us into a recession, but maybe even a full-blown depression. I just see this country, people are losing their jobs. That's going to impact all of the places where they spent their money. Those people are going to fall on hard times. I just think, the prices of things with the tariffs are going to go up. I'm very worried about the economic future. They were saying just this morning, Dana Bash on CNN was saying that for the first time she's seeing people reporting that the economy looks like it's going to start shrinking here in the United States. Yeah. That can't be good.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, never good when your economy is shrinking. I will tell you this, the government is not run like a business for a reason. The government is not for profit. It is a structure to give, people things that they need. The government is supposed to take care of Americans. That is not what private corporations do. So, of course, when you go around just slashing 50% of personnel willy-nilly, you wind up with what we are seeing here, where you're desperately trying to hire back the people who were investigating the bird flu and, getting back our nuclear weapon auditors and all that, just really important people that they just, quote unquote, accidentally fired. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. The economic picture that you're drawing is actually incredibly accurate because I don't know if a lot of folks know that about 80% of government workers actually work outside of Washington, D.C. They are all over the country. They're the people who answer the phone when you have a question about Social Security, or they're in the office to help you get your Medicaid or Medicare set up. All these services that are out in the rest of the country are being slashed as well, and maybe more so. We've heard a lot about the national parks, but that is the only way trickle-down economy works, is that you are firing these people who will then not be able to find jobs, and then those folks can't buy the things from the stores that they buy them from. The stores start doing badly, and that's the domino effect. Mm-hmm. And that's where you have a shrinking economy. And quite frankly, while that is incredibly that's terrible for the country, we are also seeing some very concerning signs of just actual ignoring of the courts and trying to, looks like they're trying to create a constitutional crisis, if not yet very soon, where we're going to have to come to a place where Republicans are going to have to stand up. Let's remember, Republicans are in charge of the Senate. Republicans are in charge of the House. What's the line, Laura?
What has to happen that will make the Republicans, aside from their own personal future, I think as some of these Republicans go home to do town halls, they realize that it isn't just the Democrats that are yelling and screaming, that their own constituents are yelling and screaming about this kind of thing. Aside from fearing that they will lose their job, what else would it be? What would have to happen from Elon Musk or Donald Trump or any of the rest of them for the Republicans to say, you know what, that's a bridge too far? Because I don't see it.
Yeah, it's very hard to tell, unfortunately, because to your point, their own futures are usually the only thing they're worried about. And even those who are retiring, let's take Mitch McConnell, for example, still hasn't been able to stand up in any way that is actually helpful. They all seem to have a little discussion and say, okay, you vote against this guy, everybody else can vote for him. And that way we have just enough, or this, just 3 votes, right? They can, if they have 4 votes voting against anything, whether it's a confirmation or a law, that goes down. They've never allowed 4 votes in the Senate from the Republican side to kill anything or any confirmation. They definitely are talking to each other and making sure that they are, quote unquote, demonstrating their independence while still never sinking anything. And this is the politics as usual that we've always seen. But I think between the town halls, which, by the way, they've been told by their leadership to stop doing because it's not going well. So between that and, possibly as these court cases continue to go, and if they do continue to ignore things, that might give some pause, but it's really, really hard to tell. And it's really scary because if they're the only ones that can stop him, and if they don't, then, we're kind of out of a democracy here, guys.
The Democratic organization that's local to where I live has started a book club, and the first book that we are reading as part of that book club is Tyranny of the Minority, and it's not even talking about what's happening right now. It starts off by looking at other countries that have lost their democracies, either permanently or temporarily, and how that happened. And the conclusion, they look at country after country over the last 100 years or so, and it's not the dictators, it's not the Donald Trumps of the world. It's the Lindsey Grahams. It's the Republicans in the Senate. Because, dictators can want anything that they want and try to get it, but they can't get it without the cooperation of people who are more interested in their own future, their own jobs, are willing to look the other way and let it happen. Those are the folks that enable a democracy to fall. And that's what I keep looking for, somebody in the Republican, an elected Republican official to stand up and say, you know what? But even the ones that did stand up, there was Rob Brezhnehan, Republican congressman who represents a swing state in Pennsylvania, and he said weeks ago, I'm not voting for any budget bill that has any cuts to Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security. But did he vote for it? Yes, he did. Yes, he did.
Because they're playing this little political game, especially with Medicaid. They are saying, well, we're not going to vote for anything that cuts Medicaid benefits. And that last word there is key. They are using that as a shield. They are saying, well, if we're just cutting the waste, we're not cutting benefits. It's an interesting little trick that they've got going because as far as I can tell, no one's been able to find the waste, at least not in any real way. And so what they're doing is just going to have to slash benefits.
Yeah, and this is an unrelated topic, but it shows the obfuscation. ICE is now reporting that they've taken more immigrants into custody than have been taken in years and years and years, something like 47,000. But of those, over 22,000 had no criminal record, no criminal accusations, no warrants, which means 52% of the immigrants who have been taken into custody by ICE were exactly the people Donald Trump said he wasn't going to target. The people who haven't become citizens, but they haven't committed a crime. And it's just this, I guess they just figure they can say anything they want, and most people will just never bother to check to see if it's right.
Well, I do think so. That's a really interesting example, and it's very sad at the end of the day. So I'm from South Florida originally, and down there, pretty quickly, they realized that they had been taken, that they had been lied to. And when he reversed Venezuelan TPS, which is temporary protected status, any president can give folks from a country temporary protected status, meaning they would have legal ability to work in the United States because of conditions in that country are not safe for them to return. When he got in, he reversed that, which was the exact opposite of what he said he was going to do. Now, what is he attacking? He's attacking immigrants and places like USAID, where they think that people don't care, that most Americans are going to look at that and say, I mean, the immigrants can't vote. What are you going to do? And the USAID, people hear USAID and they think, oh, that's money that's going out the door for all these other countries. We need to get our stuff in order first. Could not be more mistaken for a number of reasons. And if you'll give me just a little bit of leeway here, because USAID is of particular interest to me as I worked at the State Department for many years. Two things. Lots of stuff that we buy from our American farmers is bought by USAID to send overseas. So there are farmers sitting on wheat and corn and soy that is not being moved. And they're in the planting season, so now they don't know how to plan for the next one, what's going to happen. Also, their workers are probably not showing up because they're scared of raids, but that's a different story. They're getting hit by two sides. But USAID's mission is to help stabilize areas, regions, countries, right? If you're not helping with the soft power, why do you think people come over here? Why do you think people try to come here no matter what? Because their countries are unstable. They are dangerous. And everything that USAID does is to counteract that and to help people progress in their own countries, in their own regions. So it's the polar opposite of what we need to be doing.
Yeah. Laura, we need to take a break. I'm speaking to Laura Rodriguez, Vice President of Government Affairs at the Center for American Progress Action Fund. We are going to talk more about DOGE and things like reconciliation when we come right back after this.
Don't turn that dial.
A dangerous mistake to make.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive, returns right now on WCPT 820.
Joining me is Laura Rodriguez, Vice President of Government Affairs at the Center for American Progress Action Fund. Laura, everybody's talking about the budget, what's in it, what's not in it, what the Senate's going to do, and reconciliation. Explain, if you would, to the audience, what is reconciliation?
Sure. This is a tool, a budget tool, very specific to budget. It's got to do with numbers, not policy, that a majority party can use in order to get a bill through, again, a budget bill through with just 51 votes in the Senate. As many people know, usually these things take 60 votes. Reconciliation is very specific to 51. What it has to do, it has to pass a few tests. Parliamentarian of the Senate has to make sure that there aren't things in there that don't affect the budget. And it has to balance. And so with the cuts, you got to, with the expenditures, you got to do some cuts as well. And so that's what makes it a little bit tricky. And what happened was the Senate wanted to do two different reconciliation bills, which you can do. I won't get too weedy, but it depends on the fiscal year. You could do, right now they haven't finished fiscal year 25, so they could do one for fiscal year 25 and one for fiscal year 26. So they wanted to pass one that would be easier to pass, less controversial things within their own caucus, which included border energy and I think it was, border energy and, crime in some form or fashion. I might be getting that third part wrong, but that skinny one, they called it a skinny budget bill, passed the Senate. And then the House said, we can't do something this narrow. Why? Because Mike Johnson has a 1 to 2 to 3 seat majority depending on attendance right now. He's got a very, very slim majority and a caucus that's very bifurcated. They have lots of different goals and they don't always align, as we know. So there's a lot of internal squabbling between the different factions of the House Republicans on what should be in, what should be out. And he knows he's only going to get one crack at this. If they do the skinny one, that's all they're getting. So, and they want to make sure that they get these tax cuts for wealthy people. And so all that to say, the House very painfully passed their budget reconciliation bill, which did include taxes, et cetera. However, it is just the first step. So what this budget bill does is it gives instructions for each committee on how much they need to find to cut and put in. They give them numbers. And what you're hearing about these Medicaid cuts is because the Energy and Commerce Committee has to find $880 billion to cut. It only has so many accounts under its jurisdiction, and a big one is Medicaid. So I think most people are just kind of looking at that and saying, there is no way to find $880 billion here without making severe cuts here to Medicaid. So that's a lot of like weedy policy, but it really, that's how we get to they're going to cut your benefits. Because they can't figure out any other way to do it.
Right.
And this is going to be the hard part for them, believe it or not, even though last week was very, very tough for them. But this one's going to be a really, really difficult process for them. We need to see if they actually can get it across the finish line. And in the middle of that, as you know, next week, the government runs out of funding. So they've got to do that as well.
Yeah. There was talk initially that Donald Trump wanted Mike Johnson in this one beautiful bill to have things that really were not appropriate, that were not legal under the rules of reconciliation. And I actually, this was weeks ago, saw one pundit speculate that if Donald Trump wouldn't relent on that and forced Mike Johnson to put things that don't really qualify for reconciliation into the bill, and the parliamentarian objected, that Donald Trump would simply fire the parliamentarian, which seems like a very Trumpian response to being told no. But I'm guessing that some of the worst of that has now been eliminated. But it's just... I'm of two minds. On the one hand, I don't want them to destroy the country. On the other hand, maybe people should see what they voted for. And maybe people aren't going to really understand until, it causes them personal pain. I'm sorry, Laura. That's a very negative thing to say, and I'm not going to say it again.
No. Well, Joan, honestly, I think that there's a lot of folks feeling very torn, right? There's this problem where Democrats seem to always save Republicans from themselves. And it feels like it's a moment to just kind of let people realize what they voted for. If this is what they wanted, then let's give it to them and see how it goes. I think we're already seeing so much regret from Trump voters throughout the country, saying like, oh, I didn't think I was going to get fired. I do my job really well, and I'm a super hard worker. I'm not the people they're looking for. Yeah, no, they don't care. They don't care. And I just, it breaks my heart for them, but at the same time, this is what you wanted. this is what you asked for. You wanted to shake things up. You didn't care how it was going to happen. You just wanted something different. That's what we heard all throughout the post-November 4th conversations. They just wanted something different. Okay, well, here's different, guys. What do you think?
Yeah. How's that working out for you? That's what I like to say. How's that working out for you? Laura, it is a pleasure. Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us again. Always good to have you on.
Always good to talk to you, Joan. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Laura Rodriguez, Vice President of Government Affairs at the Center for American Progress Action Fund. We're going to take a break. We're going to be back with more after this.
Don't turn that dial.
A dangerous mistake to make.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive, returns right now on WCPT 820.
I am very pleased to welcome back to our airwaves Professor Brian Endless, who's Director of African Studies and the African Diaspora at Loyola University, Chicago. Also, a co-host of the World Discord podcast with our good friend, Professor Joel Ostrow. If you look their podcasts up on YouTube, you will know Brian. He's the one who has the weapons on the wall. There appears to be an axe. There's a couple of swords that look pretty dangerous.
Indeed, there are.
That's an
you got. So here's what the TikTok people tell me. Okay. You got to have your thing, Joan. You have to have something that makes you stand out, and that's the one people seem to notice.
Well, I haven't yet started posting on TikTok or some of the other channels that I've got, but I was also told that you get a lot of traction if there's a dog in the shot. So even though my content is going to be, medical and political, I planned to hold my dog on my lap to break through. But, the weapons, that's an interesting idea, Brian.
Oh, thank you. I tried the puppy early on, but she was too squirmy to stay on camera, so that didn't work for me.
Do you actually, is there a story behind those weapons? I know that's not what we're here to talk about, but I've got to know.
I was just a fan of Ren Fairs, and I picked him up over the years up at the Ren Fair in southern Wisconsin. So that's just it. I enjoyed them. I've always kind of liked medieval things, and they are lovely decorations in my home. And then also, sometimes I feel like the Rwandan government is out to get me, so you might as well have a few swords and axes.
Oh, really? Well, speaking of Africa, I know that you and Joel have talked about this, I think, last month on the podcast, and that you have been closely following what is going on in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And I'm sure I was completely, there's been a lot happening right here, Brian, so I've been a little distracted.
Oh, yeah.
But frankly, sometimes things that are going on around the world just fly under my radar. But this is something that we should know about. Tell us what's going on.
Absolutely. First, thanks for having me on, Joan. We skipped that part at the beginning. Congo, Democratic Republic of Congo, we usually just call it Congo. Congo is a country that since 1998 has had the ultimate invisible conflict. Most people have no idea there have been between 6.5 and 8 million people killed in Congo since 1998. It's one of the longest running conflicts in the world, not just on the African continent. It's had many countries involved, and for most of that time, it's been driven by a conflict with neighboring Rwanda. That's now.
So it's not a civil war; it's a border war.
It is not. So it started with a civil war. It started at the end of the Cold War. Mobutu Sese Seko was the U.S.-backed dictator in Zaire, which Congo was Zaire. And the Rwandan government helped a group inside finalize a civil war and take over Congo. But after that, while it's often called a civil war and there are a lot of rebel groups, what the international community has been clear about is the civil war here is driven by efforts to extract conflict minerals, mostly gold and coltan, out of the eastern Congo. And they have been primarily flowing illegally through Rwanda and then turned into the quote-unquote legal minerals on the international market.
The world is a big place, but it's all very interconnected. Yet still, like we saw a number of people saying, get rid of USAID because we don't need to send money to foreigners. So I give you the perennial question, why should we care?
Absolutely. The number one reason, if I can be just a little bit dramatic here, the Swords and Axe might have given it away. We all have the blood of conflict minerals on our cell phones and on our computers and laptops. Coltan is the most important element and one of the rare earth elements that is in cell phones. It's the thing that prevents them from overheating. And the same thing with laptops and game systems and things like that. Primarily it comes from Congo and from China. So it is an incredibly important mineral, and it is in a lot of ways U.S. and international companies that want this conflict to stay hidden such that they can continue backing it. The other thing is the United States has been a backer of the Rwandan government since 1994, since the genocide ended, horrific genocide in 1994. The current president, President Paul Kagame, came out on top after that. The U.S. backed him, but within a couple years it was becoming pretty clear to those of us watching that Kagame was another dictator. Meet the new boss, same as the old boss. And he started both massive human rights violations plus attacks into the Congo a few years later.
Wow. I didn't realize. I've never heard of, I think of myself as coming from a science background. You said coltan?
Coltan, C-O-L-T-A-N. It is a combination of cobalt and tantalite. And those are some of the rare earth minerals, the stuff that came from other planets or maybe from meteors hitting us. And it is only found in a couple of places on the planet. But the Congo has a number of those minerals that can be incredibly important to modern technology. And then the last few years, they've also been shipping a lot of gold out of the country. It's one of the primary new gold sources for gold coming into the world. And in the south of the country, away from this conflict, they've got as much uranium as any place on the planet. So it's very resource rich, but the people are just absolutely poor. It's a huge country, but it's the second poorest country on the planet because they're always fighting over the resources.
Is government corruption a part of the problem? I mean, I've seen some areas where, where a country is very, like oil-rich Saudis, and they spread the wealth, or, with Native American populations, when there is wealth that is generated by the land or by their casinos, they support the entire tribe. Is this a question of the people in government being corrupt and getting rich, or is the whole country just being taken advantage of?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. I'm not going to say Congolese leadership's getting rich. Mobutu was in the Cold War, but his successors since then, since 98, haven't been. The Rwandan leadership is getting very, very, very rich off of this. Kagame is estimated to have somewhere over $500 million in foreign banks, again, a leader of a very poor country. The problem in Congo is it's gigantic. It's the second largest country in Africa. It's a country where basically the capital city is think about where Los Angeles is, and the minerals are where the Mississippi River is. Oh. And between that, it's almost entirely jungle, and it's impassable. So it's very hard to move troops between one place and the other. It's very hard to move people between one place and the other. And Rwanda, also Uganda and Burundi on those borders, are sitting right next to all the minerals in the Congo, and the capital with the troops are thousands of miles away. So this is far from a great government. There are plenty of corruption allegations, but corruption's really not their biggest thing here. It's really foreign influence driving rebel groups and really setting up a proxy war.
So what would you like to see the United States do? What should we be doing?
Interestingly enough, we did two really good things from my perspective very recently under President Trump, one accidental and one purposefully. The accidental one was the U.S. is by far the biggest sponsor of Rwanda. Rwanda is almost entirely dependent on foreign aid. The U.S. is number one. UK are the number two sponsors. And when Donald Trump and Elon Musk shut down our foreign aid budget, they shut down foreign aid to Rwanda. And that's been something that I and many other human rights activists have been advocating for 15 plus years, that this government shouldn't be rewarded with U.S. foreign aid. So that's created an interesting situation. Sadly, that might have also set them up and emboldened them to take this operation. So it's a little bit of a double-edged sword. And then the second thing is the most recent conflict started in the end of last year, beginning of this year. In late January of this year, the local rebel group that the Rwandans work with, it's called M23. It's been a Rwandan-backed group for 20 years in different forms. That group took over Goma, which is the largest city in eastern Congo. It's kind of the central city there that everything goes through on the border with Rwanda. And it was a very violent takeover. And if there was any space in the newspapers and TV and social media for international news, it was one of the headlines. It actually made the cover of the New York Times a couple times with the fact that Goma had been taken by this group. What ended up happening, though, is this is now a point in time where Rwanda had always been protected by the West, especially the U.S. and U.K., and the Trump administration seems to have no interest in protecting them. And it's even gone further than that. On February 21st, for the first time ever, this started in 1998, for the first time ever, the United Nations Security Council took up the issue of Rwanda invading Congo and actually passed a resolution condemning that invasion and condemning M23 and condemning a couple of leaders on the Rwandan and M23 side. So this is actually very significant now, and I don't know that it's, a purposeful thing where everybody loves human rights all of a sudden, but the timing has just worked out such that good things, relatively positive things are happening.
Huh. Interesting. Another example of how interconnected the world is, someplace you've never heard of, that actually influences and is a part of your daily life.
Yeah, absolutely. One other thing I should say. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
One other thing I should say, by the way, the problem with cutting the aid is Congo has over 2 million internally displaced people and refugees in that area, and they are heavily, heavily aid dependent. Right now, one of the worst headlines is there are over 300,000 kids who need clean water from the international community every day to survive. And what's ending up happening is that waterborne diseases are causing more deaths than conflict, especially cholera is causing more deaths than conflict. So it's not all good.
No, it is not. And sadly, I think it's like many things right now, it's going to get worse before it gets better, because even though we've had judges ruling that, you can't just close up USAID, and you certainly can't do it the way you tried to do it. And yes, there's a lot of farmers in the state of Kansas who are going to go bankrupt if USAID doesn't buy their crops. But it doesn't make any difference if the attitude in the White House is, okay, the courts have ruled that, but they are not doing a lot of the things that the courts have told them to do. They've not rehired people that were illegally fired. They've not reopened agencies, even if sometimes they say, oh, yeah, the payments are there, but the people who are supposed to get those payments are saying, no, they're not. No, I'm sorry, they're not. That's not happening. So
this is all money that was approved in the last Congress. And, at best, this is going to end up going to the Supreme Court. At worst, they're just ignoring the rulings, as you say. And so many people, domestic and international, are getting hurt because of this.
There was a report of an NGO. I think this is it was Somalia, but I might be getting the country wrong, where there was an NGO that was like distributing food and supplies, and they had a grant from USAID to pay for security because the country's very poor and very corrupt. Right. Well, the security stopped being paid, so they stopped showing up, and all the stuff was stolen.
That was Somalia, and that's happening in multiple other places. But I saw that report. It's amazing. I think I might have mentioned a little bit. We talked about this last time. One of the most concerning things is USAID funding and U.S. administration does a lot of the health checks at international airports before people come into the U.S. So we may have many, many, many people coming in without getting the normal health checks that they would take on the other end, and coming to the U.S. and going to other countries. So disease is going to be running more rampant than it already is, too.
So just another silver lining to the cloud that is Trump and Musk and all of their buddies. Brian, we need to take a break.
Whatever color the lining is, yeah.
Yeah, really. Dr. Brian Endless is from Loyola University. He also co-hosts the World Discord podcast. And if you want a deeper dive on this subject, what was it, a month ago you and Joel did this on what's going on in the Congo?
Done two on this. I did an update with Joel about a month ago, and then we had a Jesuit priest who does work on the ground in the Congo who came on about a month and a half before that and kind of gave a local perspective. So we've covered this one a couple of times.
Yeah. I always learn things when I listen to you guys. We are going to take a break. Dr. Brian Endless and I will be right back after this.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
And I am joined by Dr. Brian Endless, who is a professor at Loyola University. He is also the co-host of the World Discord podcast with our good friend Joel Ostro. And he's also involved in something that we touched on before, Brian, but I'd like to talk about it again, the Come Together Project. Because I got to tell you, Brian, I am not feeling very let's come together.
That's the reason why we have to come together, Joan. They're trying to split us apart, and we need to not take the bait when we're doing it. It's hard, I know.
Okay, well, let me ask you, let's bigger picture here.
Sure.
Nancy Pelosi recently said that Democrats should sit back and let Donald Trump stew in his own juices. Other people in positions of power have also said that maybe James Carville said we should just play possum till the midterms and let all the bad things happen so people could really see and get a taste of what they voted for. And I guess on paper, that looks pretty good, but when you dive into what that means, you know, if you like to camp at Yosemite, there's a lot of campgrounds that may not open at all this summer, and they're certainly not going to take reservations anytime soon because so many Park Service people have been lost. And when you think about when you zero in on what it really means, I don't think I can go along with James Carville. I don't think I can just play possum until the midterm elections, though there is a part of me that thinks that the people who voted for Donald Trump aren't really going to wake up until something he does affects them, their family, their kids, their job, their colleagues, until they really do feel the pain on a very personal way. And I don't think those two things, they don't go together, Brian. I've got to be one or the other.
Don't. I think one of the things I'd add to that, before changing over to how I look at it through my Come Together Project lens, it's not just that the people have to be hurt, it's that the people have to be heard, and Fox News and talk radio and their neighbors all have to realize at the same time that this is an issue. And that's a very hard thing. There's a lot of cognitive dissonance going on here with people just not believing that Trump and the people on his side can do any wrong. And that's an additional thing that I think personally most commentators don't look at anywhere near enough. And that's one of the things that I take a look at here.
And what advice would you give to people like me who, on the one hand, feel that there's not going to be any changing of minds until there's personal experience, but on the other hand, a lot of good people are getting hurt, and I feel like I want to do everything I can to stop that.
Absolutely. So I am coming at this from two different perspectives. One of them is I see all the problems. I think they're massive. And on a very personal level, I think we need to fight back wherever we can. So I'm probably with you on that. The second one, though, is why I founded the Come Together Project. And it started back in Trump's first term, not in this term, with seeing all my friends and other people being driven apart by the politics and by what's happening. And we've been driven into two teams and two camps, and we're playing a win-lose game where there's absolutely no consensus and nothing in the middle. And what I've realized and what I've been putting together over time is everything that you were saying about what Pelosi suggests, Carville suggests, about what Trump's doing, to me means we're playing the wrong game. And I think the focus on that is not what is going to get us out of this. I don't remember if it was Einstein or Churchill or one of those famous quote people who said that you can't fix something by doing the same things over and over again. Mm-hmm. That's one of the pieces of insanity. To me, everything that's happening right now is a long-term indictment of the two-party system. And really, since the 1980s, we've been seeing that economics has taken control, that everything has turned to individualism and profits and money instead of community and instead of working with each other. And that has led to a lot of changes over time. And as this has happened, most of us in this country have been getting worse off. You know, I'd say at least the bottom 75%, and I think there's a good argument the bottom 90% of us aren't as good off as certainly our parents were. If you're in that top 10%, you're fantastic. Maybe the top 25%, you're okay. But you look at the bottom 50 and 75, inflation has left them behind for 40 years. It's not just a one-year thing. These are people who are suffering. These are people who are in really bad shape, who can't make their rent, who have to decide whether to get medicine or whether to, get child care, whether they can afford a job or have to pay for child care, whether they can get health care if they or their kids get sick. These are the people who Trump talked to. But I think these are also people who voted Democratic. And it really depends, are you in the north or the south? Are you in urban or rural areas? I think that, and the purpose we put this together is there should be a giant coalition in this country that are effectively all of us who work for a living. Everybody who gets a paycheck and who lives off of their working for somebody else or even small business owners versus the people who make all their money off investing and who run the big corporations. And I think what we've seen, that this isn't just a hatred of the rich or jealousy of the rich thing. I think what we've seen is that group of people has a lot of money, and they've used that money to buy our political system. And they have used that money to get more power, and they use that power to get legislators to pass laws that favor them and to cut regulations or put in regulations that favor them and to cut taxes. And then they get more money, and then they get more power. And that's been a 40-plus year cycle. And this, I think, is the result of it. But at the same time, they've been really smart in driving us apart. And there's been a concerted effort, and we know that there are a lot of groups out there driving the effort to make sure we don't come together, to really try to push us apart on the culture wars issues, on whether it's abortion or LGBTQ rights or racism. This is really important stuff, but we've been pushed into places where we fight and there's never a solution. I'll breathe now and let you talk.
No. What you're saying makes a lot of sense. And, I'm old enough to remember a time when the Democratic Party was considered the party of the working man.
Absolutely.
And I don't understand where we went awry. And because, Republicans have a track record. And the first time around, maybe people didn't know or they believed what they saw on The Apprentice. But, Donald Trump has a track record of lying. And to say, well, I voted for him because he said this or he promised this. I'm like, okay, but he lies, right? Like, that he doesn't tell the truth.
Right.
And I don't understand what happened, and I also don't understand how the Democratic Party lost the working man, and the wealthy Republican Party seems to have captured him.
Let's take Trump first. Pretty much all my friends who consider themselves any place on the left of the spectrum completely agree with you. How can they not see that Trump lies? I actually think we know the answer to that. It's because they get their news from different places than we do. And if you only watch Fox News and only listen to Joe Rogan and to other talk radio, you don't believe that Trump lies. You believe that Democrats and educated elites lie. And you're seeing a very different picture and different story. To me, the genius of Donald Trump was and yes, I do credit him with this one, he realized that the workers weren't being represented. And he went out in 2016 and again this time, and he told them that he noticed them and that they were important. And I don't think he was ever going to do anything for them, but he actually campaigned and talked in those areas, and he had talking heads working for him in those areas, and he picked up the working class because of that. To answer your question on the working class side, I actually think we started to lose it under the first Clinton administration. This was one of those things, I take a lot of this back to Ronald Reagan and the neoliberal, hardline, what I now call predatory capitalist policies that he put in with trickle-down economics that never worked and everything that goes with it, and money started to flow up instead of trickle down. Then we get to Bill Clinton, and the genius of Bill Clinton was he realized the Democratic Party had to move way to the right in order to compete with the Reagan Republican Party, and he moved them to the right, and he got 2 terms out of that. But what ended up happening was the Democrats stopped talking about and talking to workers. The Democrats stopped talking about and talking to unions. In a lot of ways, the Democrats stopped talking about and talking to people of color and just started assuming that those groups were on their side. And now we've seen 40-plus years of that building up. One of the things I'm really suggesting here is I don't even think it's a big middle of working class. I think it's like 75 to 90% of the people in this country have an enormous amount in common. But the messaging that we get from the elites and the news prevents us from seeing that. We only look at the small number of things we fight about.
We've got to wrap this up because we're going to be talking to the Associated Press when they do their newscast here any second now. Brian, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for sharing what you're working on with us. Dr. Brian Endless, Director of African Studies in the African Diaspora at Loyola University, co-host of the World Discord podcast. Thank you. We're going to take a break for news, and we're going to be back with more after this.
Don't turn that dial.
A dangerous mistake to make.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive, returns right now on WCPT 820.
My partner, Ray, used to work not in exactly tech like the tech bros, but he used to work in the world of finance and foreign exchange and all that stuff. And he became familiar with a guy who was considered kind of a wingnut, a fringe figure by the name of Curtis Yarvin. He has all of these really odd, he has all of these ideas about government. Some people just write him off as a fringe blogger, but more and more he has been embraced by Silicon Valley and the tech bros as some kind of he's a self-described philosopher. And his philosophy, I mean, he's been written about in Vox, Vanity Fair, Politico, New York Times, The Guardian U.S. Why are they writing about this guy that I had never heard of, and I'm guessing maybe you've never heard of, is because he's become some sort of a philosopher, a touchstone for this new idea of what government should be. And ordinarily, this would be like a thought exercise, for you and me to talk about this guy and what he thinks about government. Unfortunately, it's probably something that we need to learn about now because it's moved way beyond a thought exercise. Elon Musk is a fan. Peter Thiel is a fan. And perhaps most disturbingly, J.D. Vance is a fan of Curtis Yarvin. Curtis Yarvin. And some of his ideas are pretty radical. And some of his ideas seem like what Elon Musk is trying to do right now with the government. He has been described as a neo-reactionary. And anytime somebody is described or self-describes as a philosopher, I want to talk to Spencer Critchley, who is somebody who spends a lot more time delving into philosophy than I ever have or ever will, and also has the ability to make it understandable to us. So I reached out to Spencer and I said, this isn't the WCPT book club. We're not going to talk about the book right now. But I want to know if you want to join me on the radio to talk about this neo-reactionary guy that seems to be directing, at least in a background way, what is going on in our government right now. Spencer was gracious enough to say yes. He joins us now to have this discussion. First of all, how are you?
Increasingly alarmed and disgusted.
Yeah, I think that's an appropriate
Joan.
Response. That seems about right to me. First of all, Curtis Yarvin, which one of my articles is this? This is from The Guardian. Curtis Yarvin is hardly a household name in U.S. politics, but as the neo-reactionary thinker and far-right blogger is emerging as a serious intellectual influence on key figures in Donald Trump's coming administration, in particular, over potential threats to U.S. democracy. First of all, I thought if you were reactionary, you were already kind of cutting edge. But to be a neo-reactionary means what?
Well, I'm really glad that Ray brought this up. I think this is a really important and so far underreported movement that does seem to explain a great deal of what's going on, especially in terms of Elon Musk's role and Peter Thiel's role as the primary sponsor of J.D. Vance's political career. What was it, $15 million or something? Mm-hmm. Invested in getting J.D. Vance elected to the Senate.
Yes,
in his
indeed.
First ever political office. He's suddenly in the Senate.
And I believe Peter Thiel had a lot to do with J.D. Vance being selected as the VP, because I think anytime Donald Trump has a ready conduit to people who are wealthier than he is, he's going to make the most of it.
Yeah. And let me say at the outset that a lot of this sounds like conspiracy thinking, and I always try to really discourage people on the left as well as the right to indulge in conspiracy thinking. And, on the left, we have our own conspiracy theorists, God knows, like the chemtrails fanatics and the 9/11 truthers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is not conspiracy thinking. I'm familiar with some of this from my time in Silicon Valley, which was a while ago now. I date back to the first internet boom in the 90s, and then stayed in touch with Silicon Valley during the first decade of the 2000s. So some of this stuff is familiar to me from then, and I try to stay more or less informed about it since then. So a lot of what we're hearing now is not conspiracy thinking. This is stuff that's been developing for a long time, and you can check the sources as you did, for example, with that Guardian article.
And
Curtis Yarvin is a very influential figure in this movement, known as the neo-reactionary movement, sometimes called the Dark Enlightenment.
Really? Because they like to use the shorthand NRX, like it's a prescription for something.
For neo-reactionary. Well, Silicon Valley bros love their abbreviations, like, what is it, A16Z for Andreessen Horowitz, the venture capitalists who have their own connections to this movement. Mark Andreessen is quite a neo-reactionary. And Balaji Srinivasan is another prominent figure in this movement. He used to be a partner. Balaji Srinivasan, is a former partner at Andreessen Horowitz. This has been developing for a long time. So if you'd like a sort of capsule description, I'll do my best.
Yeah. Use small words of one syllable.
Yeah. So first of all, what's a reactionary? Traditionally, reactionaries were people who reacted against progress. So, when liberalism emerged during the First Enlightenment, the Light Enlightenment, not the Dark Enlightenment, the Enlightenment that produced democracy, and liberalism and science, reactionaries were people who wanted to stick basically with the Middle Ages. They wanted to stick with monarchy and authoritarianism and all the rest of it. So they react against change is what a reactionary is. The neo-reactionaries are reacting against modern-day liberalism and modern-day democracy. They believe democracy has failed, needs to be destroyed and replaced, and they want to go back to feudalism, essentially, when the world was ruled by princes and dukes and kings. And but it would be a techno-feudalism run on technology, and now it's been adapted to incorporate AI. So that's sort of the capsule description of the Dark Enlightenment or neo-reactionary movement. They think democracy has failed. They think that what is needed is basically authoritarianism, because the people are not equipped to rule themselves. And technology will be a key element in this new kind of monarchist way of running the government.
Apparently, he actually, when Vanity Fair did the article, he actually spoke to them, and he told Vanity Fair, and this was in 2022, the fundamental premise of liberalism is that there is this inexorable march toward progress. I disagree with that premise. Instead, he believes that the country should be run by elites who strive to consolidate their power rather than serve the public interest. The solution, Yarvin argues, is for the American oligarchy to give way to a monarchical leader styled after a startup CEO, a national CEO, or what's called a dictator, Yarvin said.
Yeah. So, and also another thing I want to be careful about. So first of all, I don't want to sound like I'm encouraging conspiracy thinking, and I want to let people know this is not conspiracy thinking.
No, this is a guy who's followed by Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, and especially J.D. Vance.
Secondly, I don't want to over-dignify it by taking these grand-sounding ideas seriously. It's very easy to dress up, your amateur philosophy by using fancy words like neo-reactionary or techno-feudalism or anarcho-capitalism, and you can quote a few sort of classical authors on this, like Robert Nozick or Murray Rothbard or Friedrich Hayek, and sound like you really know what you're talking about. But basically, this is all a load of what the British call bollocks. I mean, ultimately, what it comes down to is the fantasies of a teenage boy fueled by, computer games and science fiction novels and comic books, or as we should call them now, graphic novels. It really is. It's just paper thin. It's as political philosophy.
He was when he first emerged. Ridiculous. He was considered like somebody. He was like somebody people made fun of. He was considered like a super right-wing nut, and he wasn't taken seriously. When he first started blogging, he wrote his posts under a pseudonym, Mencius Moldbug. Now that's a guy who wants to be taken seriously. But he is now taken seriously. Spencer, before we start off on this, I need to take a quick break. I'm talking to Spencer Critchley. We are talking about this guy, Curtis Yarvin. And when we come back, I'll tell you some of the things J.D. Vance, our vice president, has said about this guy. We'll be right back after this.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
Spencer Critchley and I are talking about a guy you may not have ever heard of. His name is Curtis Yarvin. He has some very, very, very far-right ideas about government and democracy and the way things should be. And ordinarily, we wouldn't waste any of our good radio time to talk about somebody whose ideas seem pretty radical, except for the fact that Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, And perhaps now, most importantly, our Vice President, J.D. Vance, put some stock into what this guy writes and says. J.D. Vance, in which article is this? I think this is my Politico article. Yes, in Politico. J.D. Vance said that he considers Curtis Yarvin a friend and has cited his writings in connection with his plan, J.D. Vance's plan, to fire a significant number of civil servants during a potential second Trump administration. There, J.D. Vance, quote, "There's this guy, Curtis Yarvin, who's written about some of these things." This is Vance on a podcast in 2021. I think Trump is going to run again in 2024. And I think what Trump should do, if I was giving him one piece of advice, fire every single mid-level bureaucrat, every civil servant in the administrative state, replace them with our people. And gee, Spencer, it looks like J.D. Vance is getting his wish.
No, it does describe what's going on. It maps onto this neo-reactionary Dark Enlightenment plan for the world pretty closely. Let me also say, though, that, Curtis Yarvin is not a stupid person. I actually had a look at his blog back when it was still up and when he was going by Mencius Moldbug, and I didn't know who he was or where he was coming from, and I thought, wow, this guy's really smart. And then as I read more, I realized he's also a nut. But, he's not like a mentally unstable nut. I think he's a nut in the sense
he's just a nutty nut.
His ideas are crazy, and he doesn't seem to realize it. And this is a risk with a lot of very smart people who are very smart in one domain, and therefore they think they can master any other domain. And this is particularly true in my experience, well, lots of people's experience, of engineers who are really smart. I worked with a lot of brilliant engineers in Silicon Valley. A lot of them were wonderful people, but there is a occupational hazard with engineers that because they are so effective in their domain, a brilliant engineer can do truly, truly amazing things. As we have seen, we live in a world that's largely been created by them. But what they don't appreciate is that engineering, as hard as it is to master, is child's play compared to the rest of reality. All of the difficulties and complexities that make it so hard to run a society are removed from engineering projects. Mm-hmm. And so this encourages this arrogance where people with this kind of background who can be, really extraordinarily intelligent within this particular domain, they therefore think, well, my God, I could solve all the world's problems. And then that feeds into whatever psychological issues you have. And a lot of these people seem to have deep psychological issues connected with masculinity and potency and all of this stuff that fuels these authoritarian fantasies. And, the Ayn Rand's Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged also feed into this, as do comic books. The superhero. If you think about superheroes, who I grew up admiring hugely as an absolute, superhero fanatic. But when you think about it, that is, if you want to look at the politics of Superman or Batman, for example, it's pretty fascist. There is no rule of law. They just personally decide who's guilty and who's innocent, and they're free to beat the crap out of or kill people who they deem to be the bad guys. So all of that sort of plays into this. So they're not stupid, these people. I would say all of them are extraordinarily intelligent, at least the sources. I don't think Vance is a good writer, but I think he's a dope otherwise. But, Mencius Moldbug / Curtis Yarvin, Peter Thiel, Balaji Srinivasan, these people are all obviously extraordinarily intelligent within their domain. But what they don't get, and so is Musk, what they don't get is when it comes to politics and sociology and philosophy and moral philosophy, they're idiots. But they're so arrogant based on their success in this other domain, they don't realize it. I sometimes think of this as kind of an inverted Dunning-Kruger effect. The Dunning-Kruger effect where if you're not very intelligent, and I think we as a society have to stop shaming people for not winning the genetic IQ lottery. But, let's say that you're really not very intelligent in those terms of IQ, it's very hard for you to imagine what it's like to be intelligent, so you don't know what you don't know, and that's kind of the Dunning-Kruger effect, right?
Yeah, sort of like if you're stupid, you're too stupid to know you're stupid.
Exactly, and again, we shouldn't shame people because nobody, chose the IQ level their genes happen to give them.
But the other side of that coin is the public perception that people with really high IQs are weird, which is also got a little bit of truth in it. Those are the kind of
doing his best. Musk is doing his best to reinforce that impression. But what I was going to say is the inverted Dunning-Kruger effect that I think of is you get a similar risk with people who are extremely intelligent in one particular domain, and they don't know how stupid they are in other domains. So it's very similar. Like Musk's opinions on politics are truly stupid. I mean, they're laughably, childishly stupid. And we can see the idiotic mistakes he and his Doge bros are making every day. And similarly with this new reactionary movement, it really, that they're thinking, it's just, science fiction novels are part of the inspiration. And so is Ayn Rand, who's really disreputable as a philosopher. And they think that they're being super smart with these ideas they have, but people who, actually thought it through, and people who know, more than I do about it, professional political theorists would tell you these ideas are just fanciful and childish and stupid. But they sound smart, and they've, gotten enthusiastic backing from some very rich and very powerful people.
And I think it's really exaggerated, this kind of I'm rich, therefore I must be brilliant, therefore I must lead you, you must follow me. That kind of mentality is really exaggerated in people like Elon Musk. But, I've known in my days in Chicago, I've known a lot of very successful people, CEOs, that sort of thing. And I've always found that they also have this same, it's like, I don't know if you remember back 20 years ago when it was like there would always be like one CEO who threw his hat in to run for president. And it was almost always a he, because, I'm so good at this CEO thing. I should be running the country because I'm clearly, the fact that I've succeeded at the top of this company must mean I'm really exceptional and I'm really smart. And you should trust me to make all these decisions. That kind of thinking has been around for a long time. But I swear the tech bros have it on steroids.
Yeah. Well, again, what people don't realize who work in engineering or who work in business, the people who have this kind of arrogant but ignorant attitude, is they don't realize that as impressive as their accomplishments in engineering or business are, those domains have eliminated everything that makes running a society difficult. So, you're essentially riding a bicycle with training wheels, or you're doing the equivalent of building a Lego building instead of an actual building.
Yeah.
It's impressive, but it's nowhere near as hard as trying to organize a functioning society that also protects people's rights. Of course, they don't actually believe in individual rights. They believe in this, what they think of as a techno-aristocracy, basically, so that by definition, if you're rich and successful, that's why you get the rule.
I want to talk more about this, Spencer, but we gotta go for a break. Spencer Critchley and I will be right back after this.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
Spencer Critchley, who you know as the author of Patriots of Two Nations and whose book, The Liberal Backbone, we are serializing as the unofficial WCPT book club, is here for another discussion. We're talking about Curtis Yarvin, who may not be someone you've ever heard of, but his ideas have been absorbed by many of the billionaires and our vice president, who now seem to be doing what they can to make them happen. And I mentioned earlier in our discussion that J.D. Vance described Curtis Yarvin as a friend and somebody who he thought had great ideas. Apparently, in a July Substack post, This was J.D. Vance. I don't know when he said that they were friends, but in July, Curtis Yarvin said that Vance was a random normie politician I've barely even met. But in October, The Verge, in addition to all the other articles on this guy, New York Times, Politico, Vanity Fair, Vox, The Guardian, The Verge reported in October that no one online has shaped Vance's thinking more. There's another quote in this where I don't know which of my articles I'm reading from now. Robert Evans, who's an extremism researcher, hosts a podcast, and he did a 2-part series on Yarvin. In part, he said, what's unique is his way of rebranding or repackaging old reactionary ideas in a way that appealed to libertarian-minded kids in the tech industry, and in eventually getting some of them to embrace a lot of far-right ideas. That's the novelty of Yarvin, and that's his real accomplishment. Your thoughts, Spencer?
Yeah, I think that's great. And I'd like to cite a couple of other references before I forget to give them credit. Also, let me note, Curtis Yarvin thinks black people are by nature inferior to white people. So
I believe he's also anti-Semitic as well, but I
no doubt.
Yeah.
No doubt. So, the reaction is deep with these ones. So Kara Swisher, the leading tech reporter and analyst and blog and podcaster, is terrific on all things Silicon Valley, and her opinions of Musk and Thiel and these guys are great because they're just absolutely coruscating the way she describes these guys, and she knows them all personally very well. And then a friend, my friend Laura Lee Martin, who worked in the Carter administrations, actually on the Jimmy Carter campaign, and has been doing good things in California state government ever since, passed along a Substack post to me by a guy named Mike Brock, who I'd never heard of before, and I really don't know much about him. And when I don't know much about the source, I start off pretty skeptical. But I started reading the post. It's from his Substack, which he calls Notes from the Circus, and this particular post is called The Plot Against America. So that sort of set off my anti-conspiracy thinking alarm bells. But I started reading it, and I thought, well, geez, this is well written. And then as I kept reading, I recognized a lot of the references he was making, so I knew they were credible, and he seemed to be getting the details right. And as I kept reading, I found that I think it's a really valuable history of where all this came from. So that's called The Plot Against America by Mike Brock, and you can find it on Substack. If you're interested, there's some respectable ideas buried in this. The original sort of libertarianism, which one can disagree with, but which is intellectually respectable, is kind of one of the most important roots of this line of thinking. But then they take it to these sort of sci-fi, cartoonish, superhero, absurd extremes. But do you think people would be interested in, knowing what the sort of respectable foundations of this are?
Sure.
So, a lot of this is based on a philosopher named Robert Nozick. And he's kind of the counterpart to John Rawls, who's one of the most influential liberal philosophers of recent decades. He's the guy, he came up with a theory of justice that's almost the default current theory of liberal justice. I have some objections to it, but that's beside the point for now. Robert Nozick is kind of like the libertarian answer to Rawls. And Nozick argued that the essence of freedom is individual freedom, and so each person has to be seen as an inviolate individual. And so nobody else can use any of us as a means, he wrote. And nobody can interfere with our individual rights without our permission. And so there's nothing that a state can do that takes away any individual's rights that's legitimate, except for the absolute minimum, which is to protect their own safety. So the only reason to have a state is to protect us from infringements on our rights by others, or violence committed by others. But beyond that, there's almost nothing that a state should do. And this is called the minimal state theory, and it's based on a principled argument for freedom, which, as I say, you can agree with or not. I don't, but it's principled and very carefully thought through. The state you might agree that the state could build highways or provide, water systems or stuff, but beyond the absolute minimum, they would say it's an infringement on freedom unless people each person voluntarily agrees to have their rights infringed or to pay a tax to pay for something, but nobody should be forced to pay a tax that they don't individually agree to or forced to have any infringement on their freedoms that they don't voluntarily agree to. So that's kind of what you might say is one of the respectable intellectual roots. Another one would be the Chicago School of Economics, where Milton Friedman came from, and its roots are in the Austrian school with Friedrich Hayek. And that's, a very strongly free market ideology that basically argues that capitalism should not be regulated because the market will do everything more efficiently than government could ever do it, and at the same time it will also not infringe on people's rights, including their property rights, which people who think like this think are essential to individual freedom. And most people actually think to some degree that your property rights are essential to your freedom because you don't want government just saying, I'm taking your house now.
Well, I read that part of what drew Musk to these writings, this kind of way of thinking, is the idea that he could be so much richer and so much more successful if he could just get rid of all the government regulation and all of the rules that he has to play by in the United States. Ray also was just texting me that apparently Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, is somebody who has espoused Curtis Yarvin's ideas before.
Oh, my God. So absolutely diametrically unchristian. And Mike Johnson, is this butter wouldn't melt in his mouth, kind of oily, pseudo-Christian, in my opinion. He's what actual Christians refer to as a whitewashed tomb. Have you ever heard this term? It's quoting Jesus from the book of Matthew, I think, where he's rebuking the Pharisees who are pretending Jesus is saying you basically are going on constantly about how holy you are, and you're such utter frauds. You're like whitewashed tombs. You look nice on the outside, but inside all is death.
Okay.
That basically sums up Mike Johnson perfectly, in my opinion. But so out of these sort of more or less respectable roots that I disagree with, but at least, I respect the thinking that went into producing these ideas, like libertarianism and this free market capitalism philosophy and all, comes this stuff, which adds technology to the mix and makes it extremely radical. So, and provides the tools to break down any form of liberal society, including a conservative, the conservative end of liberalism, essentially break down liberal democracy itself, which is what Musk wants. And that's what I think he actually is trying to do with DOGE, is not to make government more efficient, but to destroy government. Because this movement is so extreme, that's the goal, is to destroy government, remove all obstacles to these heroic, tech CEO types who see themselves as Ubermenschen, and they see the potential of technology to do that. And one of the key concepts here is what's called decentralization, because if you look at what digital technology, especially in the form of the internet, does, is it decentralizes everything, so for good or for ill. So one of the first things to be decentralized was the music business back in the early days of MP3s and Napster, where it destroyed the business model of the record industry. And the record industry, God knows, was corrupt and exploitive. I happen to know that from firsthand experience. But it did actually pay artists. Artists were actually, to some extent, protected, and they did actually get paid for their work. They often got cheated, but they could actually get paid. Technology in the form of MP3s and the internet completely decentralized the control of the record companies and the publishing companies and the performing rights society, so that artists were no longer being paid. And all the money that used to go to artists was now going to whoever owned the tech company that had just decentralized them. So everybody thought this was really democratizing back then. You know, people thought, oh, my God, music wants to be free. This is wonderful. No, we're no longer under the thumb of the music business. And they didn't realize what was actually happening was they were stealing these struggling artists blind, and all that money was going to a few rich people who owned these tech companies. And that's how we ended up where we are today, where you can get 1 million YouTube listens and make, I forget what is $30 or something. So music, it happened to the music business, but it's happened to journalism. It's happened to the whole entertainment industry, the whole media industry, including journalism. Happens to industry after industry where digital technology acts like a solvent, causes that industry to fall apart and decentralize. And it looks democratic because suddenly everybody has access. Anybody can release a song on Spotify now, for example. Anybody can have a podcast. Anybody can start, in the old days, a blog. Anybody can have a Substack. But it destroys the value for everybody at the same time, except the people who own the platforms. So you can't make money in making music anymore, but you can make money aggregating music if you're Spotify, or you can't make money in journalism anymore, but you can make money by aggregating the output of journalists. So decentralization and then this kind of radical re-centralization under the control of a few oligarchs is a large part of the story of technology. Unfortunately, as a huge disappointment to those of us who back in the early days, I confess to being a techno-utopian back then, naively thinking this actually would democratize everything and lead to a more cooperative and more peaceful world.
And you don't think that way anymore?
Oh, my God, no, I'm so pessimistic, unfortunately. God, I mean, look at the horrible destruction caused by social media. With the very name sounded so great initially. Mm-hmm. And I was an early adopter. I was very enthusiastic about it. And before that, the first generation of the Internet, a lot of it was kind of utopian. I mean,
well, a lot of the guys who started what are now these big companies, I read Kara Swisher, the tech reporter you talked about, who reported on tech before the rest of us knew what was going on. And she literally saw the rise of Bezos and Musk, and she had their private cell phone numbers, and they were always, reaching out to her because they wanted her to write about them and give them attention. She talks about how most of these guys, not all of them, she says Jeff Bezos was always, as she put it, feral. From the first time she met him, she thought he was feral. Anyway, all these guys, she said, they had this idea of how they were going to make the world a better place. She said until they became really rich and successful. And then all of a sudden, they weren't talking about that anymore. Now it was kind of like, regulation and how do I protect my profits and this and that and the other thing. But she said, they came with all this altruism until they got really, really, really rich. And then that wasn't so important anymore.
Yeah, well, today's libertarian is yesterday's hippie is one way of looking at it. I mean, it's the hippie movement. A lot of the people who were hippies, the baby boom generation, which is our generation, has a lot to answer for, in my opinion. And a lot of these folks who were hippies as long as basically mom and dad or somebody else was paying for it. And the moment they had to get jobs, suddenly they were libertarians. And, a libertarian has a lot in common with a hippie, if you think about it. And I was also on board with the whole hippie ethos. But that was about being kind to each other and helping each other out and, not being a jerk and allowing people to be themselves and all of that. But the moment there was money involved, George Harrison once described the summer of love. Was that 67? Summer or 68?
Yeah,
but he described it.
That was the summer of love.
He was in San Francisco for the summer of love. He said it lasted for about 5 minutes. And that same ethos prepares you to become a libertarian once there's some money at stake, which is what happened with a lot of hippies. A lot of these old Trump supporters now were hippies in their youth. If you went through their old scrapbooks, you'd see all the long hair and the pot smoking and the Grateful Dead concerts and stuff, and now they're these reactionary libertarians. It's pretty disappointing.
So, well, we should probably take a break. Spencer Critchley and I know, gets in the way. Spencer Critchley and I are talking about this guy, Curtis Yarvin, who used to be considered fringe and frankly is still pretty fringe, but is somebody who J.D. Vance and Elon Musk and Peter Thiel and apparently Mike Johnson happen to think has some great ideas. We're going to be right back after this.
Now back to Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
Spencer Critchley and I have been talking about Curtis Yarvin, who is a guy who has some really what he calls neo-reactionary views about government, which, long story short, suggests that basically the entire bureaucracy of government should be eviscerated and all those people should be cut out of government, and we should have a king or a monarch, or as some people might refer to it, as a dictator who will be a benevolent leader, and because they're so smart, they will make all the decisions for us and we won't ever have to worry about anything ever again. Of course, the people I know who think that way, Spencer, somehow they always envision themselves at the head, at the top of that pyramid.
Exactly.
They're not the ones who say, yes, this should happen, and I'm going to be rank and file down there at the bottom, and I'm just going to do what I'm told. That doesn't seem to be how it works out.
No, it's always this is ultimately a megalomaniacal fantasy, and somehow you're going to be one of the tiny number of winners. You'll be at the top of the pyramid. And some of these folks, can reasonably, at least in the short term, expect that. Somebody as rich as Musk or Peter Thiel is another central figure in all this, as we've noted, and there are others. I don't think their long-term prospects are good, but in the short term, they could reasonably picture themselves that way. But everybody else who's signing up for this is signing up to be a serf in the techno-feudal society, and they don't seem to quite get that. If you like, I'd like to point out a couple of things people should watch out for so they can recognize this when it's happening. So I was talking about decentralization as, digitally fueled decentralization is key to this. So part of that is decentralized finance, and that's where the cryptocurrency movement comes from. And again, a lot of people sign up for it saying, oh, man, this democratizes, money, and it gets us out from under the supposed heel of the Federal Reserve and the banks and all of that. But again, it creates countless losers and a tiny number of winners with cryptocurrency, which has just become a vehicle for people to manipulate the crypto markets and essentially do the modern equivalent of pump and dumps on the suckers. And this is something that Trump has signed up for with that Liberty Financial or whatever thing that he created to sell meme coins about him and about Melania, which are just basically scams, of course, because Trump's involved, so of course it's a scam. So that's decentralized finance. And then there's something called a DAO, D-A-O, which is a decentralized autonomous organization. And this is seen as a replacement for what we think of as a government. So again, they don't want to shrink government the way like a libertarian would. They want to destroy government. And they want a society where there is no government. Instead, what you have is purely voluntary, on-the-fly associations, which are enabled by technology because you can just communicate with each other digitally and decide, okay, we want to live in this particular part of the world. Maybe it's largely online, but maybe we want to live on this particular island, and these people are literally buying islands or trying to create cities and colonies. And we voluntarily decide we're going to live there, and we will form contracts with each other for providing utilities and security and financial services through crypto, no doubt, and all of this. But it's only for us, and you only get to be there if you're admitted, and it's entirely voluntary. And there's a key libertarian concept is the right to exit. So you exit American society and you enter this voluntary society you're creating for you and your, fabulously, heroically successful buds. So watch out for the idea of decentralized autonomous organizations, and for these private projects, which are underway now. I mean, Thiel tried to do the seasteading thing, where you are on, it sounds like a nightmare, but you're trapped with a bunch of tech bro a-holes basically on an island in the middle of the ocean.
That would be fun.
I'm thinking, oh my God, please shoot me now.
Yeah.
But, and then there's one called Praxis, which is a project that's raised investment capital from Thiel and others to form one of these, enclaves. And they just exit from democracy and from civil society, and they think they can reconstruct something, based on their cockamamie theories and technology.
Well, Peter Thiel's going to have to create his own community because, he gave a lot of money to a lot of charitable causes and was rewarded with New Zealand citizenship. But the New Zealanders kind of soured on Peter Thiel, especially when he wanted to build this bunker-like house/compound, partly underground. I guess it was the place that he could run to once he finally destroys the world. And apparently they won't give him the building permits that he needs.
Oh, gosh, what a shame.
Yeah, so now he's got this piece of land, and they don't like the idea of like a survivalist bunker house/compound in New Zealand. So, he's going to have to, maybe he'll do, what are those Del Cobb kind of things where you have to be 55 to live there? Maybe they'll create a community like that.
Del Webb? Is it
Del Webb?
Yeah. Oh my God! Imagine the retirement home for these guys when it all comes crashing down. That part of this has also got some sort of end times mysticism about it. They're convinced it's too late for the world. This is why Musk thinks we have to migrate to Mars, and so it's already too late to save the climate and or to prevent nuclear war. So they've researched the planet and found that New Zealand is one of the best places to be in terms of safety from radioactive fallout.
Oh, well, that's why.
So
Spencer, we could talk throughout the evening about anything. We are out of time now. Thank you so much. I knew this would be a fascinating discussion, and I knew you were the person to have it with. So thank you so much for spending this time with us.
Thank you.
And remember, if you haven't picked up his book, Patriots of Two Nations, it's not too late. Plus, the book that we are serializing, he is serializing at dastardlycleverness.com, The Liberal Backbone. We will be talking about that. Read your next chapter. We'll get to it in a couple of weeks. That's going to do it for me. Patty Vasquez is off tonight, but Ken Mejia Beal and Elliot Serrano are guest hosting, and they're going to be joined by former Congresswoman Marie Newman. She has a new book that's coming out, a memoir, A Life Made from Scratch. So they're going to be talking about that. And tomorrow morning, 6 a.m., Choose Views. Richard is going to have, among other guests, Robin Steens, president of Advance Illinois. Tomorrow, I'm going to have back one of our favorite people to talk to about the Midwest, Pat Kreitlow from Up North News. There's a lot going on in Wisconsin, and if you're looking for something to do, some activist activity that you are looking to do, we're starting to send a lot of people up to door knock and make phone calls to get that open Supreme Court seat in Wisconsin to the more liberal of the two candidates. Elon Musk, speaking of the devil, is pouring a ton of money in the very, very far-right Republican who is running for that Supreme Court. We'll talk to Pat about that kind of stuff when we get together tomorrow. I will see you tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Have a great evening, my friends, and good night.